is the strangest genre of fiction to me. The entire purpose of the genre is to instill fear into the audience, and it's odd that we actively decide to seek out this emotion. Don't get me wrong, I enjoy being scared from time to time, but I couldn't begin to tell you why I do. Fear is something that we try to avoid as humans. When we feel it in our everyday lives, it serves as a defense mechanism. So then, why would we ever want to feel this way on purpose? Why would we willingly put ourselves in a situation where one of our most intense and usually unpleasant emotions spring forth? I can't answer for everyone, but perhaps some appreciate the art that comes with horror. If recent Hollywood horror films are any indication, it isn't easy to frighten people. It takes more than a somewhat gory image to really scare people. Scaring people is a true talent, and it can take years to perfect the craft. And I believe that there is no one who embodies this fact more than Junji Ito. Since 1987, this man has been creating some of the most horrifying manga on the market. His artwork is instantly recognizable with the gross atmosphere it exudes, and I mean that in the best way possible. His art gives off an uneasy feeling, and that is perfect for what Mr. Ito is trying to accomplish. With each panel, he wants the reader to feel more tense about going onwards. You can usually tell when the big scare will occur, it's just the uncertainty of exactly what it will look like, and having the bravery to get there in the first place. By playing with his work in these ways, it's no wonder he is often hailed as the king of horror manga. And seeing that it is manga he is working with, Ito is able to toy with his audience in ways other media cannot. Manga and similar pieces of literature, such as comic books or graphic novels, have something unique about them: the turn of the page. With art being just as big a factor in these works as the writing, it must be used to the author's advantage. The first thing to catch the eye when flipping the page will be the art, and Ito knows this fact. So he saves his most terrifying panels for when the reader does decide to turn the page and are at their most vulnerable. This technique of scaring the audience is a subtle jump scare. When most people think of this term, they associate it with either video games or movies. However, we aren't here today to talk about those kinds of jump scares. Instead, let's talk about how it can be used most effectively in manga. As the name suggests, the desired result is to make the audience jump. Ito wants them to have some physical reaction out of pure fear. But he can't just take the easy way out and add a sudden loud noise and creepy image when the audience least expects it. Because whoever is reading gets to control when the scare happens to them. Rather, he has to rely on his own talented art to scare and surprise them when they first see it, with no added sound effects. To accomplish this, he must hide the horror where the reader won't see it, on the next page. As they turn the page, their eye will be caught by the new frightening drawing waiting for them. And the best part is, by making the audience a key player in this act, they essentially scare themselves, giving the horror an extra punch. In my opinion, as someone who does not play many horror games, keep in mind, this is the most effective version of the jump scare. The anxiety induced by the uncertainty of what could possibly be on the next page makes me more cautious and on edge the entire time I'm reading. And along with that, the scare itself isn't diminished by the lazy ways other media like to incorporate a jump scare, namely movies, but that's a rant I won't bore you with today. But beyond the horror of the art, manga is also a piece of literature. So, how does Junji Ito write his stories? Well, if there is one constant that seems to be present in nearly all of his works, it would be how his characters fall into spirals of insanity. What do I mean by this? Well, simply put, Ito likes to have characters that get progressively more insane as the story unfolds. He does this in many different ways as well, almost all of which pertaining to the main horror aspect of the story in some way. In some stories, the change is sudden, like anyone who hears a certain record play, loving it so much, they justify killing over it. In others, characters can already be crazy from the beginning, but become even more deranged as the story continues. For example, a boy whose interest in grease becomes so obsessive that lard comes out of his pores. Oh, that story is so gross. Ito doesn't have a set number of characters that fall into the spiral in his stories either, although usually he has between 1 to 3, with the main character commonly either staying sane or not succumbing to insanity until the very end. Unless it's Hellstar Ramina and literally everyone goes batshit by page 30. Seriously, what the hell was Ito on when he wrote this? The final type of spiral a character can fall into is my personal favorite. A character that starts out sane, but slowly begins to cave into the madness around them. I don't think I'm alone in this sentiment either, since his works that are most frequently regarded as his best have this spiral. Enigma of Amigara Fault, Shiver, Hanging Blimp, and more all use this spiral style, and all of them are some of his best and most terrifying stories. The reason this particular style works so well is because the shocking art is given the perfect backdrop of psychological horror. Whatever Ito chooses to be the frightening aspect of these kinds of stories must be so fear-inducing that it drives normal people psychotic. To really get my point across, let's take a brief look at my personal second favorite Junji Ito story that has a perfect blend of his use of the page turn, as well as his signature spirals of insanity. The Long Dream. Interestingly, this story has something Ito doesn't use often, a cold open to establish the plot. A woman is in the hospital for an illness we never learn the name of. She is so terrified that this illness will kill her that she sees the god of death in the middle of the night. We also see some foreshadowing into the real horror of the story when she says, "I'm going to die soon and be nothing. I won't exist anymore." But more on that later. We soon learn that the god of death she saw was actually another patient in the hospital who has been suffering from long dreams. Each night, he feels as though his dreams last longer and longer, to the point where a single night can seem like years for him. After we are introduced to his condition, we get the first page-turning scare, and see what he has become. He is hideously disfigured, and the sight is horrifying. This fear seeps in with the next few pages as he runs towards the woman's room, believing they have been married for thousands of years due to his dream the night he saw her. And when this man's horrible form finally finds some sort of familiarity with the reader, we turn the page once more to see how much more terrifying he has become after one more night of sleep. The art is some of Ito's best. There is just enough detail for the man to seem horrifying, but not utterly ridiculous. However, the art is even more frightening because of what brought it to be. The man suffering from the long dreams has been driven insane due to his condition. We learn that his dreams are not some long story that he lives through, but instead a confusing, lonely, and horrible experience. The only dream he has that seems to be pleasant is one where he believes he fell in love for thousands of years. But he also had to suffer through 10 years of the same war and do nothing but study for 9 years in previous dreams. Anyone would go insane from experiencing these never-ending nightmares, night after night. And that is exactly why this story is elevated far beyond the heights it would have reached with only the art. In the end, the man is stuck in a never-ending dream. The reader has to wonder if it's another nightmare he is stuck in for eternity, or was he lucky enough to have a pleasant dream that night? The woman afraid of death is also infected with the long dreams, meaning she too will eventually fall into a never-ending sleep. She will no longer have to fear death, but instead fear existing forever in insanity. Every time I read this story, I'm not only scared by the art, but also the thought of going to sleep. How long will I dream for? Will I be trapped in a nightmare that will last for years? This thought finds itself in my head because I've already seen how badly it affected someone else's sanity. To be trapped in eternity, in torture thought up by your own mind. No one would have the mental fortitude to handle that. So overall, what does this story tell us about Manga Ito's, Jesus Christ. So overall, what does this story tell us about Junji Ito's manga style? Well, when he's at his best, he uses his art to make us vulnerable, and his stories to truly terrify us. When forcing us to turn the page in order to scare ourselves, he is startling us in the moment with his detailed and grotesque art style. That's when he can really amp up the spiral of insanity his characters fall into, because they are oftentimes scared by exactly the same image we saw. It makes us think about, if this situation were real, would we fall down the same exact spiral? Ito has had decades of experience terrifying readers, so he is well aware of what truly horrifies people the most. The fear induced by his art will only last so long after the shock wears off. But the fear he can easily plant in people's heads once they are shocked using his spirals will always be in there somewhere. It makes you wonder, if making his characters spiral into insanity is so important to him, what if he wrote an entire manga about spirals? Finally pushing the most terrifying aspect of his stories to the forefront with no filter. Well, that would have to be some of his scariest work yet. Wait, he has done that, hasn't he? Perhaps it's time someone made another hour-long analysis of one of the most horrifying and bleak worlds ever created. Like that's ever gonna happen.